Hi. No, it's not a fancy editing trick. Some of Native Instruments' plugins and content now run on MPC hardware. It's not a merger between the companies and hell didn't freeze over, but rather a subset of Native Instruments' Play Series plugins, and some of its expansion packs can now be bought and loaded onto any MPC. The MPC versions are cheaper than the ones offered by Native Instruments, but they don't have all their features. In this video, I'll take a closer look at what's new, the details and pros and cons compared to the standalone versions of Native's offerings. Then I'll also explore how AKAI's modern MPK MIDI controllers and other MIDI controllers can automap and control any plugin that supports Native's NKS standard via their complete control software. And if you have no idea what that means, stay tuned and I'll explain. Finally, as long as we're here, AKAI also added a few very interesting new features to its MPC3 firmware. I'll explore that too. Before I start, a quick disclosure, everything I show you will be in beta state, which AKAI gave me early access to, so things aren't final. As usual, no money changed hands, neither AKAI nor Native Instruments have any say over the content of this video or get to see it before it's published. Okay, let's start with a look at Play plugins or instruments, 5 of which are coming to MPC. These are 2 of them. If we take a look at Native Instruments' website, you'll see they've got quite a few of these. These are instruments or plugins in different genres. Most of them cost $49. And Play instruments share a common interface, though with different sample content, different skins, of course, and different presets. So for example, this is the Analog Dreams instrument on MPC, and here it is on a computer. In both cases, there's a main home screen and then additional pages that let you access more parameters. But beneath the skin or surface, things are fairly different. Let's start with taking a look on the desktop side, and then we'll take a look at how things have been converted to MPC. On the desktop, there are 8 knobs on the bottom, 1 knob to control the balance between layers A and B. Layering is a fundamental aspect of Play instruments. And then you've got 6 configurable macros. In this case, they've been configured to control cutoff, resonance, release, chorus effect, delay. But if I load up a different preset, then you might see 6 completely different macros. The 8th control is overall volume of the patch. You've got a nice randomization feature, which you don't get, unfortunately, on the MPC version, at least not yet. You can swap samples for either layer A or layer B. Of course, the balance matters here. On the desktop side, each of the layers can contain either a sample, which is what these are, or a waveform and wavetable. On the MPC side, as far as I could tell, wavetables aren't supported, only samples. And there are also relatively fewer samples, I think, which means there's also less choice on the MPC compared to the desktop. So here, if I open this up, you can see about 5 pages of over 30 samples or wavetables, whereas on MPC, you've got, I think, about 40. So around 40 compared to over 100. On the desktop side, you've got total freedom to assign these 6 macros to any of up to 12 parameters, and if you like, you can also draw your own curve on a per macro basis. On the homepage of MPC, you've got obviously a critical balance control between layers A and B. Macros are more limited. You've got 4, of which 3 are fixed to destination categories. The top to the filter, then envelope times, and LFO or motion, but you can customize which of the layers these point to over here. And then the 4th meta macro is more configurable. You can choose 2 from a list of destinations. Here too, you've got your choice of sample per layer. And then this zone on the home screen isn't just a pretty picture, it's actually an XY pad where you can designate it to change, as you can see, both the layer mix and these macros. And you can customize this over here using this button. So for example, if I wanted quadrant 3 to be only layer A and the filter and envelope times and motion, everything to be all the way down and dry, I would hit capture. Then let's morph to layer B and the filter wide open and all of these all the way up. Again, hit capture. And then quadrants 1 and 2, let's just leave them as is somewhere in the middle. So now I could morph from this to, well, maybe the filter all the way closed is a bit too much. So let's maybe leave it over here. Again, hit capture. So let's morph from this to this. That's a pretty long envelope time. So those are the home screens. Let's dive in a little bit deeper. I won't go over all of the sound design parameters in each of these. Overall, I'd say there are more of them on the desktop compared to MPC, but with both, you've got plenty of parameters per layer. There are 2 LFOs on the desktop compared to 1 LFO here. There are more filter choices on the desktop compared to MPC, where I think there are only low pass and high pass options. The mod matrix on the desktop is way more extensive compared to only 6 slots here on the main matrix and then another page for aftertouch. And then on the effects side, you've got 4 slots here compared to 6 slots on the desktop. There's an EQ on both, though on the desktop it's per layer. Though of course on MPC you can add additional effects on the channel strips. And then one more important thing you get on the desktop version, which you don't get on the MPC version, is a sequencer. So this is the raw sound, but with a sequencer on, you can sequence motion to pitch, velocity, and to any one of the 6 macros. So the end result is that when using samples on both layers, they can sound very similar. But there are many desktop presets you won't find on MPC, and vice versa. For example, Mini Thump 1. I couldn't find that in the list here. Same goes for quite a few more. I found Fade Black. An extra pitch envelope there. As long as they don't use wavetables, I think they come pretty close. Let's try another. Let's compare one more instrument, Nacht. Let's first try one that's sample-based. Here too, there are presets here that don't exist here and vice versa. This one has the same name, so let's take a listen to it. Let's try Acid. Certainly different. Notice this is wavetable based here and sample based here. So the actual wavetable or sample names are different. Let's try one more. Bon Mot. Here, the sample names are the same because these aren't wavetable based. Flying Saucer is one which is wavetable based, so sounds very different. And of course, if a patch is sequence based, then MPC is going to have a harder time matching it. In terms of CPU usage, I didn't find these to be too taxing. So here I've got 2 plugins plus a kit-based track. I created a project, which is just each of the 5 instruments. So here I've got Analog Dreams, Cloud Supply, Homage, Nacht, and Sway. This, by the way, is what they look like graphically. Sway, Homage, and Cloud Supply. So with just these 5 loaded, we're at 44% memory and 25%, 26% CPU. Of course, as we start using up voices, CPU usage will go up. And the animations and the XY pad have a useful musical meaning. And most importantly, it runs on an MPC if that's your environment. As far as sound design parameters, while fewer, I think things are pretty capable here on MPC. Certainly what's missing are the wavetable oscillators, sequencing, and adding randomization would be fun too. So those were play instruments. Let's move on and talk about expansions. These are drum kits and instruments available for Machine and for other DAWs. There are, I think, over 100 of those on Native's site in various different genres. 5 of these are now making their way to MPC. Expansions contain both kits and samples you can play. Let's maybe look at Lone Forest on both. So with MPC, you get Keygroups, which are like instruments but based on samples, and drums, which are kits of 16 different samples. On a desktop, and in particular in the Machine software, you also get kits and sounds, and also loops and one-shots. Now you could of course consider any sample a one-shot, so the Keygroups and drums here obviously include those as well. I didn't find any loops here though. So let's take a look at kits first. There actually seem to be more or less the same number and name of kits on both. So say Deep Inside kit and Deep Inside kit here, broken tape. Broken tape kit. Let's maybe go through a few more. For example, this kit is called Repitch. And Repitch over here. One more, let's do Blessed Buddha. This is what it sounds like on MPC. And I'll cut it short. Let's try that over here. So they sound more or less the same, but there are a few differences under the hood. So a few things to look at here. First, when the hits are sample-based, then things are easy. They should sound more or less the same. Each pad may have effects on it. And there are some differences. So here, for example, they implemented the delay, but sometimes you'll see effects sampled in here. Now I see that I picked a kit which is mostly sampler-based. Here we go. So this is a Prism preset. Obviously, we don't have Prism in here. So in this case, they just sampled it in. With MPC, you can only use samples in drum kits, whereas in Machine, you'll often see kits with synth presets. So those are kits. Beside that, you'll get instruments on both. Here they're split to drums and multi-sampled instruments. If we head into MPC, you'll actually see more instruments, or Keygroups as they're called here. And that's because these include the same instruments that are multi-sampled over here, but also multi-samples of synth presets for synths like Monarch, Massive, and Prism, which don't exist as plugins here. So let's take a look, for example, at Bloom Piano. You can see that over here, it's 31 Keygroups. I'm guessing more or less the same here. You can see that while they sound similar, they're not identical. Look at another Bastardo, which we have here. So 5 Keygroups here, 5 zones here. And then, like I mentioned, there are plenty more instruments here, which you won't find at all on the list of few over here, because presumably these are some of the synth presets over here that have been multi-sampled. Finally, you also get a few demos. Let's go up here. Demo tracks. These are totally different from the ones on Machine. There are fewer of them, and as you'll see in a bit, they only live on one track. You can see the locator points on the top of the arrangement, but there's no easy way to swap clips in and out. It's just one long arrangement. This as opposed to Machine projects where you get multiple scenes and access to clips within an arrangement. So I've been asking for scene and clip functionality within MPC for a while, like you have on Force. One would hope we'd see that one day, but there's no public confirmation from AKAI on that. Okay, let's move on to a totally different aspect of what Native and AKAI are doing, and that's their partnership around the MPK MIDI controllers. There are two aspects to this. First, there's a content bundle offering. So if you buy or have already bought one of a few new AKAI controllers, you'll be able to choose one of 3 Native Instruments content bundles. I have to say these are all quite impressive regardless of which one you choose. This is all desktop content, not MPC content. However, some of these will include samples you can transfer over and others you can multi-sample to create MPC sounds. Then the final aspect of this partnership between AKAI and Native Instruments is support for NKS. NKS stands for Native Control Standard. It's a connectivity protocol that automaps plugin parameters to Native's MIDI controllers, making them feel more like hardware instruments with parameter names, values, parameter groups, and even graphics appearing on their MIDI controllers. This connectivity protocol is supported by multiple third-party plugin providers, and it also lets you browse and preview presets on any plugin that supports it, whether it comes from Native or from third parties. So for this to work, you need to load up plugins through Native Instruments' Complete Control software. This is a beta, so things might change. But overall, as the integration stands now, as you can see, there are plugins from multiple companies here, for example, including Arturia. For this controller, I can browse presets up and down using these 2 buttons. So as I press this, we go down presets. As I press this, we go up presets. So you do need to double-click to load an instrument. You can still swap presets here. So this is pretty useful on its own as opposed to having to go to your mouse to audition presets. Then by default, these 8 encoders are auto-mapped to the first 8 parameters. And we can actually look at what these control by clicking on this button here. Now, as you can see, we've got more than one page of parameters, so you can tab between pages of parameters using, again, as it's mapped here, these 2 pads to go back and forth. One thing I hope they change when this gets out of beta is that parameters either jump or you have to look for them and pick them up. There's no scaling or just relative CC mappings because these are encoders, so that should be easy, hopefully. And then 2 more buttons if you do choose to use multiple plugins within Complete Control as a host, then you can move between plugins using these 2 pads. And like I mentioned, if your controller isn't one of those directly supported by Complete Control at the time of the making of this video, then you can always go ahead and MIDI learn the CCs for the knobs or the buttons. So for example, if I wanted these 2 buttons to go up and down between presets, I'd just press this, map this one, and now this will be how you swap presets. By the way, if you've got a plugin that doesn't support NKS, you can still use it. The experience won't be as nice though. So for example, let's go to Tal's Juno. So as you can see, parameters have wonky names and pages don't have any names, but you can still tab between them to look for the parameters you want to control. So not ideal. It would be nice, I think, if they'd let you edit these for plugins that don't support NKS 2. And then before we part ways for this video, a while back, AKAI announced MPC version 3 was coming out and started a public beta. I covered most of its new features in a video I'll link to below. However, they've added quite a bit of additional functionality to the final version of MPC 3. Let's take a look at some highlights. So one of the biggest new changes is to the Keygroup engine. This is a multi-sample I made of TO5 by Oberheim. And the basic idea behind Keygroups is that as you play up and down the keyboard, different samples are loaded up to remain faithful to the original synth. Available on my Patreon, by the way. So we can now do a lot more in these Keygroup instruments. This is legacy mode, so this is how they've been before. 6 tabs with obviously very useful parameters in them, but if we get out of legacy mode, you'll see we now have 10 tabs, I think, with many, many more features. We knew this from the previous beta. You can now use 8 layers if you want. We now have 2 filters, which can be routed in series or in parallel. And of course, multiple filter types. You can automate, I think now, pretty much any synth parameter that you like. You've got more envelopes and more LFOs, various other improvements like a note counter as a mod source. One of my new all-time favorites is portamento for samples. So previously, this is how we'd play, which is cool, but this is nicer. And there's a legato option, obviously, so you'll get portamento only when you play legato. And there's also a quantize option for glissando. Then, if this wasn't thick enough for you, there are unison options, so we can add up voices, pitching them, stereo spread. I think there's so much going on in this particular sound. It actually doesn't add much. Yeah, too much phasing. But for other sounds, it may be nice. And then there's a harmonizer function, and it wants me to go to the next tab, so we can pitch shift copies. So that's very cool. Then there's a 32 slot mod matrix with plenty of sources to go around. And then these are destinations. So a lot to play with in here. And we've also got controls, which is excellent in a mod matrix. You don't have to use multiple slots for that. And multiple curves, why not? Next up, another interesting new thing. Up until now, I have to admit I wasn't much of a list edit user. Anyway, previously you could only have one modifier active at a time. Now you can choose multiple modifiers and edit their values and go back and change another one. Oops. Here we go. Come on. This one. Anyway, it stores the value for multiple modifiers at a time, not just one. And then one more cool addition. So I've got this loop going in an audio track, and I've got it set to time stretch. So it will time stretch if I want, without changing pitch. But if I wanted to, I could also put it in repitch mode. And here we go, where are we at? So now as I increase tempo, it'll pitch up, and as I decrease tempo, it'll pitch the loop down, but still keep it as a loop. So a pretty nice addition there. So those are the main things that are new for MPC3 and the integrations with native instruments. I've got a ton of unique analog synth multi-samples on my Patreon, where you'll also find my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.